House MD was known for brilliant writing and difficult medical mysteries, but there were some episodes so stupid they made you question whether the writers had completely lost their minds. I'm about to show you 12 episodes that were so badly written and poorly conceived that they nearly destroyed the show's reputation for intelligent television. Starting with one that ends with House literally crashing a car through someone's house like he's in a Michael Bay movie. Season 7, Episode 23, Moving On, brings House's obsession with Dr. Cuddy to its most absurd and illogical conclusion when he discovers she's moved on with her life and found happiness with another man. House's reaction to Cuddy's new relationship isn't just inappropriate or unprofessional, it's literally criminal. He gets in his car and deliberately crashes it through the wall of Cuddy's living room while she and her boyfriend are inside, creating a scene that belongs in an action movie rather than a sophisticated medical drama. This bizarre, destructive outburst isn't motivated by any logical character development or believable emotional escalation. It's just House suddenly deciding that attempted vehicular homicide is a reasonable response to romantic rejection. The car crash betrays the carefully built complexity of House's personality that had been developed over 7 seasons. Instead of showing a flawed but brilliant character dealing with loss, the episode turns him into a dangerous psychopath who tries to kill people when he doesn't get what he wants. Rather than providing a cathartic or meaningful finale to the House-Cuddy relationship, the episode is remembered as a complete narrative train wreck that left both characters and audiences baffled at the apparent abandonment of the show's own established tone and internal logic. The scene feels like it was written by someone who had never watched House before and thought the character was supposed to be an unstable criminal rather than a complex anti-hero. House decides that people who don't want sex must be medically broken and need to be fixed. Better Half from Season 8, Episode 9, becomes one of the show's most tone-deaf episodes through its mishandling of asexuality, treating an asexual couple as a medical anomaly that needs to be corrected rather than a valid sexual orientation. House makes a bet with Wilson that one or both members of the asexual couple must have a hidden medical or psychological reason for their lack of sexual desire, essentially arguing that asexuality isn't real and must be caused by some underlying health problem. The episode's script ultimately validates House's ignorant premise by giving the husband a medical diagnosis that supposedly explains his lack of sexual interest, reinforcing the harmful idea that asexuality is a disorder rather than a legitimate orientation. Instead of treating asexuality with nuance, respect, or even basic understanding, the episode delivers a tone-deaf and almost mocking outlook that suggests anyone who doesn't experience sexual attraction must be psychologically or physically damaged. The episode triggered widespread criticism for its backward approach to LGBTQ+ topics and its complete failure to research or understand what asexuality actually means for the people who identify with that orientation. This represents the show at its worst, using its medical authority to spread misinformation about human sexuality while treating marginalized identities as punchlines rather than legitimate ways of being human. House and his team spend an entire episode being judgmental about people's sex lives like they're conservative talk show hosts. Season 6, Episode 18, Open and Shut, centers on a patient who's in an open marriage, but the episode quickly makes clear that the writers have nothing but skepticism and outright disdain for consensual non-monogamy. House and his team repeatedly dismiss the couple's relationship as inherently doomed, treating the patient's medical conditions seriously while handling her marriage as an elaborate joke that everyone should see through. The medical team spends more time judging the patient's personal life choices than actually focusing on her health problems, turning what should be professional medical care into a morality lecture about traditional relationship structures. The story predictably ends with validation of House's cynicism when the couple splits up, delivering the simplistic and judgmental message that non-monogamy always equals failure rather than offering any real insight into human relationships. The episode treats consensual non-monogamy like it's an obviously ridiculous lifestyle choice that no reasonable person would make, rather than acknowledging that different relationship structures work for different people. Instead of exploring the complexity of human relationships or showing medical professionals maintaining appropriate boundaries with patients, the episode becomes a vehicle for the writers to express their personal opinions about unconventional relationships. House becomes inappropriate with a teenage patient, and the show treats trauma like a plot twist instead of something serious. Skin Deep from Season 2, Episode 13, is often remembered for its shocking twist, but many fans and critics call it out as deeply problematic in how it handles sensitive topics around gender identity and sexual abuse. House's remarks and behavior toward his teenage supermodel patient consistently teeter into inappropriate territory throughout the episode, crossing professional boundaries in ways that would get any real doctor fired and possibly arrested. The story's big reveal about the patient's gender identity and traumatic history of sexual abuse is used primarily for shock value rather than being treated with the sensitivity and care that such serious topics deserve. House's callous attitude toward the patient's trauma and the script's apparent prioritization of surprising the audience over thoughtful storytelling leave a disturbing impression that lingers long after the episode ends. The episode treats a teenager's history of abuse as a medical curiosity and plot device, rather than recognizing the real human suffering involved in such situations, reducing serious trauma to entertainment. The combination of House's inappropriate behavior and the exploitative use of sensitive topics makes this episode feel more like exploitation than the intelligent drama the show was known for at its best. A main character kills himself with absolutely no warning because the actor wanted to leave the show and the writers couldn't think of anything better. Simple explanation from Season 5, Episode 20 features the shocking suicide of Dr. Kuttner, but the character's death was written into the show purely because actor Kal Penn wanted to leave for a job in the Obama administration. The suicide feels completely out of nowhere because there was virtually no foreshadowing or psychological groundwork laid for such a dramatic character decision, making it feel abrupt and emotionally manipulative rather than organic to the story. For a show that was typically adept at slow-burn character development and psychological complexity, Kuttner's death is delivered with the emotional coherence of a cheap soap opera twist designed purely for shock value. The episode tries to explore the team's reaction to sudden, inexplicable loss, but the lack of any believable build-up to Kuttner's decision makes their confusion feel less like genuine grief and more like the writers scrambling to justify a poorly planned plot development. Many viewers felt alienated by what seemed like a lazy writing solution to an actor's departure, especially when the show had previously handled character exits with much more thought and care. The episode represents a significant departure from House's usual standards of psychological realism, prioritizing real-world production needs over maintaining the integrity of the fictional world they had carefully constructed. A famous singer suspects her biological father died in Hurricane Katrina, and somehow, this becomes the most boring episode of television ever made. Season 2, Episode 23, Who's Your Daddy? Follows a famous singer whose life gets turned upside down when she begins to suspect that her biological father died in Hurricane Katrina, but the execution makes this potentially compelling premise feel tedious. The episode meanders between overwrought melodrama and unfocused medical mystery, including outlandish twists about the patient's paternity that feel more like soap opera plotting than the intelligent storytelling House was known for. Despite featuring a guest star who should bring charisma to the role, neither the performance nor the emotional beats are enough to compensate for a plot that feels contrived, padded, and artificially stretched to fill the episode runtime. The Hurricane Katrina connection feels exploitative rather than meaningful, using a real tragedy as background for a forgettable medical case without adding any genuine insight or emotional weight to the actual historical event. The episode lacks both House's signature sharp wit and the kind of meaningful medical casework that made the show compelling, instead delivering a forgettable hour that fans consistently cite as easy to skip. The combination of weak plotting, melodramatic execution, and wasted potential makes this episode feel like it was written by people who fundamentally misunderstood what made House work as a television show. The show suddenly becomes a musical zombie apocalypse for no reason, and then ends with the most out-of-character breakup in television history. Bombshells from Season 7, Episode 15 begins with the serious premise of Dr. Cuddy facing a potential cancer diagnosis, but quickly derails into a series of jarring fantasy sequences that completely destroy the episode's emotional coherence. House's psychological response to stress manifests as wild genre-jumping scenes, including musical numbers, film noir sequences, and even a zombie apocalypse scenario that clash completely with the show's established dramatic tone. Instead of providing meaningful comic relief or illuminating character insights, these random fantasy sequences feel like the writers threw every crazy idea at the wall without considering whether any of it served the story or characters. The episode's emotional conclusion features Cuddy breaking up with House after his Vicodin relapse, a decision that many fans found completely out of character, given her long-standing awareness and acceptance of House's addiction issues. The tonal whiplash between silly fantasy sequences and serious relationship drama makes it impossible for viewers to maintain emotional investment in either the comedy or the dramatic stakes. This episode represents everything wrong with House's later seasons, prioritizing gimmicky storytelling over character consistency and using random weirdness as a substitute for genuine creativity or emotional depth. House decides that a patient's life-threatening condition is the perfect opportunity to play games with his medical team. Season 3, Episode 8, Whack-A-Mole, features House turning a serious medical diagnosis into a literal game by sealing his hypothesis in an envelope and forcing his team to compete to uncover the answer. This contest setup trivializes the patient's genuine medical crisis, treating someone's potentially life-threatening condition as an opportunity for House to demonstrate his intellectual superiority over his colleagues. The episode's subplot involving Detective Triter's ongoing vendetta against House for his drug abuse gets bogged down in repetitive, convoluted drama that stalls the episode's momentum without adding meaningful character development. The game format undermines both the show's usual emotional stakes and its commitment to medical realism, making the diagnostic process feel artificial and disconnected from the human suffering it's supposed to address. Fans consistently call this one of the series' weakest and most filler-heavy episodes because it compromises the show's core values of brilliant medical detective work in service of a gimmicky storytelling device. The episode fails to justify why House would waste time playing games when a patient's life hangs in the balance, making his behavior seem cruel and unprofessional rather than brilliantly unconventional. A genius physicist decides being smart is too hard, so he starts doing drugs to make himself stupid, and the show thinks this is profound. Ignorance is bliss. From Season 6, Episode 8, follows a once brilliant physicist who becomes fed up with the supposed burdens of genius and purposely dumbs himself down with street drugs to work as a courier. The plot leans heavily into melodramatic territory, emphasizing misery and social isolation as the inevitable fate of intelligence, which feels more like pseudo-intellectual posturing than genuine insight into the human condition. The episode's simultaneous team subplots lack energy and focus, failing to provide counterbalance to the main story's heavy-handed exploration of what the writers seem to think are profound themes about intelligence and happiness. Rather than feeling like a compelling character study, the medical mystery comes across more like a lecture about tired, curse of genius tropes that have been explored more thoughtfully in countless other stories. The physicist's decision to deliberately make himself less intelligent through drug use feels more like a writing exercise than a believable character choice rooted in genuine psychological development. The episode represents House at its most pretentious, using medical cases as vehicles for shallow philosophical musings rather than focusing on the human drama and diagnostic brilliance that made the show compelling. House decides to drug a patient with truth serum like he's a CIA interrogator, and the diagnosis involves oyster bacteria because apparently the writers gave up. Season 6, Episode 7, Known Unknowns, pushes medical implausibility to ridiculous extremes when House and his team decide to coerce a patient into confessing secrets by using an illicit truth serum like they're conducting enhanced interrogation. The episode fumbles through a parade of increasingly wild misdiagnoses before ultimately resolving the case with an outlandish explanation involving a rare strain of oyster bacteria that feels more like science fiction than medical drama. The truth serum subplot represents a complete departure from any semblance of realistic medical practice, turning House into a rogue agent rather than a doctor, and making his methods seem more criminal than unconventional. The eventual diagnosis is so outlandish and the investigative steps leading to it are so unrealistic that the episode fundamentally undermines the show's credibility as a medical drama rooted in actual medical knowledge. Many longtime fans point to this episode as a perfect example of House's late-stage over-reliance on sensationalism and shock value at the expense of the medical plausibility that grounded the show's earlier seasons. The combination of illegal interrogation tactics and absurd medical explanations makes the episode feel like it was written by people who had completely forgotten what made House work as both entertainment and medical education. House decides to perform surgery on himself in his bathroom like he's in a horror movie instead of a medical drama. After Hours from Season 7, Episode 22, features House attempting to surgically remove tissue from his own leg while sitting in his bathtub, creating a sequence that many viewers found less thrilling than simply implausible and grotesquely exploitative. The self-surgery scene is criticized for indulging in gore and shock value for its own sake, abandoning the show's usual focus on brilliant diagnosis in favor of graphic imagery designed purely to disturb viewers. The episode's disconnected secondary plots fail to provide adequate balance to the disturbing main storyline, leaving viewers with little relief from the graphic and psychologically disturbing content. Many longtime viewers see this episode as a clear low point in the show's gradual descent into outlandish behavior by its lead character, representing everything wrong with the series' later seasons. The bathtub surgery feels more like torture porn than medical drama, prioritizing shock value over character development or meaningful exploration of House's psychological state. The episode abandons any pretense of medical realism or professional ethics, instead offering viewers a horror movie scenario that belongs in a completely different genre of television. A patient crucifies himself, and House responds by proposing marriage to Cuddy because apparently the writers thought both of these things made sense. Season 7, Episode 8, Small Sacrifices, features a medical team treating a man who crucified himself as an act of religious devotion, a sensational premise that's handled with excessive melodrama and forced emotional beats. The episode's treatment of religious faith feels clumsy and exploitative, using extreme religious behavior as shock value rather than exploring the genuine complexity of faith and mental health with appropriate sensitivity. The House and Cuddy subplot is equally contrived, featuring House lying to Cuddy about something important, getting caught in the lie, and then trying to fix everything with a rushed marriage proposal that feels more like panic than genuine romantic development. The episode's handling of both religious devotion and romantic relationships feels inauthentic and manipulative, relying on extreme behavior and grand gestures rather than the subtle character work that made House's relationships compelling. The combination of religious sensationalism and romantic desperation creates an episode that feels like it was assembled from rejected soap opera scripts rather than written by people who understood House's character or the show's strengths. Even devoted fans generally regard this episode as a lesser entry that represents the show's tendency in later seasons to substitute outrageous situations for genuine character development and emotional authenticity. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every time House had Riz, click the video on the screen.